The rules came on a single sheet of paper. Cold, calculated, written like I was nothing more than a stranger. Every line wasn't guidance. It was a wall, a barrier between me and my grandkids. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Don't come without notice. Don't hug them without permission. Don't be alone with the kids. Don't bring up certain topics. Don't talk to them unless we're around. Every sentence burned. They weren't just rules. They were accusations. Her way of saying you're not worthy, and I realized this wasn't about visits. This was about dignity, about turning love into a contract. That night, I sat with that paper in my hands, feeling its weight, like every word was trying to crush the love I carried for my grandkids. But something inside me refused to die. Because this wasn't just about me. It was about the right of a grandfather to love his grandkids without asking for permission. I could have obeyed in silence. That's what she expected. But I took a breath, looked at that paper, and decided this would be the last time they treated me like an unwanted guest in my own family. This is my story. My name is Mark Taylor, and today you'll hear how a man, treated like an intruder, turned the tables and reclaimed what no one has the right to take away, the love and respect of a grandfather for his grandkids. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to the channel and share in the comments. Have you ever been forced to swallow ridiculous rules meant to keep you away from the people you love? But before I show you how I reacted and how everything changed, you need to know who I was before that list, and why she thought she could reduce me to a mere visitor. My name is Mark Taylor. I'm 67 years old, and for 43 years, I managed convenience stores across 3 different chains in suburban Ohio. If you've ever worked retail, you know it's not just about selling cigarettes and lottery tickets. It's about reading people, understanding what they want before they even know it themselves, learning to spot a liar from across the store, recognizing manipulation tactics, and most importantly, knowing when someone's trying to play you. Linda, my wife of 40 years, always said I had a 6th sense for people's real intentions. You can read folks like a Sunday newspaper, she'd laugh, watching me handle difficult customers or negotiate with suppliers. That skill served me well in business, and it served me well in life, until Jessica Martinez became Jessica Taylor 3 years ago when she married my son David. At first, I thought she was perfect for him. Beautiful, articulate, seemed to genuinely care about David's happiness. She worked as a social media coordinator for a local non-profit. One of those jobs that sounds impressive, but doesn't pay much. David, my youngest at 34, had always been a bit naive about people's motives. As an accountant, he was brilliant with numbers, but terrible at reading between the lines with humans. The first red flag should have been the wedding planning. Jessica insisted on a destination wedding in Mexico. Nothing wrong with that, but she made it clear that my suggestions weren't welcome. When I offered to help with costs, she smiled sweetly and said, "That's so generous, Mark, but we want this to be our thing, you know? Our thing, not family thing, their thing." Linda and I exchanged glances that day, but we kept quiet. Young couples need their independence, right? The grandkids came quickly, Emma, now 5, and little Jake, 3. From the moment Emma was born, I was smitten. This tiny, perfect little person who shared my DNA, who had David's serious eyes and Jessica's dark hair. I'd spent 43 years selling other people's products, but holding my granddaughter for the first time. That was the first thing in my life that felt like pure gold. For the first 2 years, everything seemed normal. Linda and I would babysit when David and Jessica needed date nights. I'd take Emma to the park, teach her to throw a baseball in the backyard, read her stories in voices that made her giggle until her sides hurt. When Jake came along, I was ready to be the grandfather I'd always dreamed of being. But somewhere, around Emma's 3rd birthday, things started changing. It began with small comments. "Mark, maybe don't give Emma so much sugar before dinner." Reasonable enough. Then it was, "Mark, we're trying to limit screen time, so no more cartoons when you babysit." Again, fair enough, but then the comments got sharper. "Mark, you're confusing Emma with all those old stories about back in my day. We want her focused on the present." And my personal favorite, "Mark, you're a little too physical with the kids. All that wrestling and tickling isn't really appropriate anymore. Too physical with my own grandchildren." Jessica started insisting that visits be scheduled in advance. No more dropping by on Saturday mornings with donuts. No more surprise trips to the zoo. Everything had to be planned, approved, supervised. The breaking point came 6 months ago. I'd promised Emma I'd take her to see the new animated movie that weekend. She'd been talking about it for weeks, practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. Friday afternoon, I called to confirm pickup time. "Oh, Mark." Jessica's voice carried that tone I was beginning to hate, saccharine sweet with a razor blade underneath. "I'm so sorry, but we've decided Emma's not ready for movie theaters yet. Too overwhelming. Maybe when she's older." Emma was 4.5. I'd been taking David to movies since he was 3. "Jessica," I said, keeping my voice level, "Emma's been looking forward to this all week. We can pick an early showing, less crowded." "Mark," her voice sharpened, "I'm her mother. I know what's best for my daughter. My daughter, not our granddaughter, her daughter." That's when I knew this wasn't about movies or sugar or screen time. This was about power, about establishing who controlled access to those kids. And she'd decided it wasn't going to be me. The list of rules arrived last Tuesday morning, delivered personally by Jessica while David was at work. She stood in my kitchen wearing workout clothes, and that smile that never quite reached her eyes, watching me read every humiliating line. "I hope you understand, Mark. It's not personal. We just need some structure around family time. Boundaries. You know, boundaries." That's what she called it. I looked at her standing in the kitchen where Linda and I had raised David, where we'd hosted countless family dinners, where I'd taught my son to scramble eggs on Sunday mornings. This woman who'd been part of our family for 3 years was now dictating the terms of my relationship with my own grandchildren. "And if I don't agree to these boundaries," her smile faltered for just a second, just long enough for me to see what was really underneath, pure, cold calculation. "Oh, Mark, I hope it doesn't come to that. The kids love you so much. It would be such a shame if they had to learn that Grandpa couldn't follow simple rules designed to protect them. Protect them from me." After she left, I sat in that kitchen for 2 hours, reading and rereading those rules. Each one designed to strip away my dignity as a grandfather, to turn love into a checklist of approved behaviors. But here's what Jessica didn't know about Mark Taylor. 43 years of managing people had taught me something valuable. The person who thinks they hold all the cards usually hasn't noticed what game they're really playing. And this game was about to change completely. You have to understand something about the convenience store business. It's not just about keeping shelves stocked and registers running. It's about being a psychologist, detective, and diplomat all at once. You deal with every type of person imaginable, from the sweet grandmother buying lottery tickets with her social security check to the strung-out kid trying to shoplift energy drinks to fund his next fix. In 43 years, I learned to read people like barcodes, quick scan, immediate information. Jessica Martinez, now Jessica Taylor, had always been a harder read than most. She had this way of presenting herself that felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced her personality in front of a mirror until it looked natural. The kind of person who always knew exactly what to say, exactly how to position herself in any situation. When David first brought her home 4 years ago, Linda and I were cautiously optimistic. David had terrible luck with women. His previous girlfriend had been a drama queen who manufactured crises for attention. Before that, a party girl who treated David like a personal ATM. So Jessica seemed like an upgrade, stable job, well-spoken, seemed to genuinely care about David. But even then, something felt off. Linda put her finger on it first. "She agrees with everything we say," Linda observed after Jessica's third or fourth family dinner. "Not naturally, like she actually thinks the same way. She agrees strategically, like she's taking notes for a test. I'd noticed it too. When we talked politics, Jessica somehow held every opinion that would keep her in good standing. When Linda mentioned loving a particular restaurant, Jessica suddenly loved it too. When I talked about my work experiences, Jessica found ways to relate everything back to her own expertise. It wasn't conversation. It was positioning, but David was smitten, and honestly, after his track record, we were just grateful for someone who treated him decently. So we welcomed Jessica into the family, hoped for the best, and kept our observations to ourselves. The wedding should have been another red flag parade, but we were too focused on David's happiness to pay attention. Jessica insisted on controlling every detail, not unusual for a bride, but she had this way of dismissing suggestions that felt personal. Not "I prefer something different," but "that's not really our style," or "we're going for something more modern, we and our and us." Always drawing lines between the established family and the new unit she was creating with David. The guest list became a particular point of tension. Jessica had a small family, divorced parents who barely spoke to each other, no siblings, few close friends. David's side would naturally dominate the wedding, but Jessica found reasons to exclude people. "Your Uncle Bob drinks too much at parties," she told David. "Maybe he should sit this one out. Your cousin Sarah's kids are going to be too disruptive for the ceremony we're planning. Your work friends are nice, but they don't really fit the vibe we're going for." One by one, David's connections got edited out of what was supposed to be their special day. By the time the final guest list was set, it looked less like a family celebration and more like Jessica's carefully curated social media post. But the biggest red flag came during the rehearsal dinner speech. David spoke about how grateful he was to have found Jessica, how she'd changed his life for the better, how excited he was to start their future together. Sweet, genuine, pure David. Jessica's speech was different. "I want to thank everyone for welcoming me into this family," she began, and that sounded promising. "David has shown me what real love looks like, and I promise to take good care of him, like he was a responsibility she was accepting, not a partner she was choosing. I know change can be hard," she continued, looking directly at Linda and me, "but I hope everyone will understand that David and I need space to build our own traditions, our own way of doing things." The room went quiet. It wasn't what she said. Newlyweds establishing independence is normal. It was how she said it, like a warning, like a declaration of intent. Linda squeezed my hand under the table. We both understood. Jessica wasn't just marrying David. She was declaring ownership. After Emma was born, Jessica's control mechanisms became more sophisticated. She'd phrase restrictions as parenting philosophy. "We believe in attachment parenting," she'd explain when limiting our babysitting time. "We want Emma bonding primarily with her parents during these crucial early months." When Emma turned 1, it became, "We're following evidence-based developmental guidelines." Too many different caretakers can confuse children's sense of security. At year 2, we want Emma learning boundaries and consistency. Having different rules at Grandma and Grandpa's house undermines our authority as parents. Every restriction came wrapped in expert-sounding justification. Jessica had a talent for making reasonable concerns sound like established science, and David, bless his heart, believed every word. He wanted to be a good father, and Jessica positioned herself as the expert on what good parenting looked like. "Hey, Tried talking to David about it once, about 6 months before the list arrived. We were having coffee at the diner, where I used to take him after his Little League games. Just the two of us. "Son," I said carefully, "I feel like I'm walking on eggshells around Emma and Jake. Every time I try to do something fun with them, Jessica finds a reason it's not appropriate." David looked uncomfortable. "Dad, Jessica's read a lot about child development. She just wants what's best for the kids. I want what's best for them too, David. I've wanted what's best for you your whole life. Did I do such a terrible job that you don't trust me with your children?" That hit home. David's face softened. "Of course not, Dad. You were a great father. But things are different now. There's more research, more information about what helps kids thrive. Research that says grandparents are dangerous? Not dangerous, just Jessica thinks too many different approaches confuse kids. She wants consistency." I stirred my coffee, choosing my words carefully. "David, when you were growing up, did it confuse you when your grandparents did things differently than Mom and I did?" He was quiet for a moment. "No, I loved the different experiences." "Then why would it be different for Emma and Jake?" David shifted in his seat. "Jessica's their mother, Dad. I have to support her decisions." And there it was, the fundamental shift. David had gone from making decisions as a father to supporting decisions made by Jessica. She'd positioned herself as the primary parent, and him as the backup enforcer. Looking back now, I can see how methodically she'd isolated David from his support system. First the wedding guest list, then limiting family gatherings, then establishing her authority over parenting decisions. Each step seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they formed a pattern. Jessica wasn't just controlling access to the grandchildren. She was controlling David's entire family experience, making herself the gatekeeper for all family relationships. The genius of it was that she never looked like the bad guy. Every restriction came with a reasonable explanation. Every limitation was presented as being in the children's best interest. She never said, "I don't want Mark around the kids." She said, "The kids need consistency and structure." But that list, those cold, calculated rules, finally showed her hand. She'd gotten confident, maybe overconfident, and revealed what this had always been about: complete control over family dynamics, with her as the sole authority. Jessica had made one crucial mistake, though. She'd assumed that 43 years of retail management had only taught me how to stock shelves and count register drawers. She'd overlooked the most important skill I'd developed in all those years of dealing with difficult people: patience. When someone's trying to manipulate you, the worst thing you can do is react immediately. Give them enough rope, stay calm, and watch carefully. Eventually they'll show you exactly who they really are. Jessica had just handed me that rope, neatly typed and numbered. Now it was time to see what she'd do with it. The thing about working retail for over 4 decades is that you develop a radar for people's hidden agendas. When someone walks into your store acting overly friendly, asking lots of questions about your security system, you don't immediately accuse them of planning a robbery. You watch. You document. You let them reveal their intentions through their actions. That's exactly how I decided to handle Jessica. The day after she delivered her list of rules, I did something she wasn't expecting. I followed them, every single one. I called before visiting. I asked permission before hugging Emma and Jake. I stayed in the living room where Jessica could monitor every interaction. I kept my conversations light and superficial, avoiding any topic that might be deemed inappropriate by the family censorship board. Jessica seemed pleased with my compliance. "See, Mark, this isn't so hard. Everyone's much more comfortable now." But while I was playing the obedient grandfather, I was also doing what I'd done with thousands of potential shoplifters over the years: observing patterns, documenting inconsistencies, and waiting for the subject to reveal their true nature. and Jessica, feeling confident in her victory, started getting careless. The first crack in her facade came during a family barbecue 2 weeks later. Linda and I arrived precisely on time. Heaven forbid we show up unannounced. And Jessica greeted us with her practiced smile. Perfect timing. The kids just finished their quiet time. They're so much better behaved when they stick to their schedule. Emma and Jake ran to hug us, but I noticed they glanced at Jessica first, seeking permission. That broke my heart more than any rule on that list. These babies were learning to second-guess their natural impulses because their mother had turned affection into a privilege that could be revoked. David was grilling burgers, looking stressed. When I offered to help, Jessica intervened smoothly. That's so sweet, Mark, but David has his system. We don't want to throw off the timing. 20 minutes later, when David burned the first batch of burgers, Jessica's reaction was telling. Not supportive or understanding, but annoyed. I told you to set a timer, she snapped. Now we don't have enough food. I offered to run to the store for more burgers. Simple solution, right? No, Jessica said quickly. We'll make do. The kids can share. Why wouldn't she want me to help solve the problem? Because it wasn't about the burgers. It was about maintaining control over every aspect of the gathering, even if it meant the kids went hungry. But the real revelation came when Jessica thought I wasn't listening. I'd gone inside to use the bathroom and heard her on the phone in the kitchen. The tone was completely different from the sweet, patient voice she used around family. I know, Mom, but I can't just cut them off completely. David would never forgive me. Pause. No, I'm handling it. I've got rules in place now. They can't do anything without my permission. Another pause. Trust me, after a few months of this, they'll get tired of jumping through hoops. They'll start visiting less, and eventually David will see it's easier when it's just us. I stood in that hallway, blood turning to ice water, as Jessica laid out her long-term strategy. This wasn't about protecting the children or maintaining boundaries. This was about systematically removing Linda and me from the family equation. Entirely. The most chilling part, she'd done this before. Just like with Miguel's family, Jessica continued. Sometimes you have to be patient, but people eventually give up when you make it too much work to maintain relationships. Miguel. I'd heard that name before. Jessica's previous boyfriend, the one she'd dated for 2 years before meeting David. According to Jessica, Miguel's family had been toxic and controlling, which was why their relationship ended. But listening to her casual admission of manipulating family dynamics made me wonder, had Miguel's family really been the problem? Or had Jessica simply wanted them gone? After the barbecue, I did something I hadn't done since my retail security days. I started an investigation file. Jessica Martinez, pre-marriage name research, social media history, previous relationships, employment background. If she had a pattern of controlling behavior, there would be evidence. What I found over the next week made my stomach turn. Jessica's social media told 2 different stories, depending on when you looked. During her early relationship with David, her posts were full of family appreciation. So blessed to have found such a wonderful family. And David's parents are amazing. Can't wait to be their daughter-in-law. But after the wedding, the tone shifted subtly. Posts about setting healthy boundaries and protecting your nuclear family from outside interference. Articles shared about toxic in-laws and manipulation disguised as love. She was conducting a public relations campaign against us, slowly and methodically. The employment background check was even more interesting. Jessica had listed her previous job as lasting 3 years. According to LinkedIn, she'd actually been there only 18 months, the 2 years before that. A gap, she'd explained to David, as focusing on personal growth and family. I called an old friend who worked in HR at Jessica's previous company. Just a casual conversation between old acquaintances, nothing that would get back to Jessica. Oh, Jessica Martinez, Carol said when I mentioned the name. Yeah, I remember her. Good worker, But there were some interpersonal issues. What kind of issues? She had a way of creating drama between team members, always positioning herself as the reasonable one, while somehow everyone else ended up in conflict. We couldn't prove she was stirring things up, but the office politics got really toxic during her time here. Why did she leave? Officially, she wanted to explore other opportunities. Unofficially, her supervisor was building a case for termination. Too many complaints from co-workers about feeling undermined or manipulated. The picture was becoming clearer. Jessica had a pattern of entering established groups, whether workplace teams or families, and systematically repositioning herself as the central authority while marginalizing potential rivals. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, Emma herself. During one of my supervised visits, Emma was playing with her dollhouse. Jessica was in the kitchen, just out of earshot, and Emma started acting out a scene with her toy family. "The grandpa doll wants to visit," Emma said in a tiny voice. "But the mommy doll says he has to ask permission first." "Why does he have to ask permission?" I asked gently. Emma looked toward the kitchen, then whispered, "Because the mommy doll says the grandpa doll might not be safe. He might say bad words or break things." My heart shattered. Emma was internalizing Jessica's narrative about me being potentially dangerous. A 5-year-old was learning to be afraid of her grandfather because her mother needed to maintain control. "Do you think the grandpa doll is dangerous, sweetheart?" Emma looked confused. "No, he's nice, but the mommy doll says sometimes nice people aren't really nice." That night, I sat in my home office, surrounded by printed emails, social media screenshots, employment records, and handwritten notes about overheard conversations. 43 years of retail management had taught me to build airtight cases against people who thought they were smarter than the system. Jessica had made the classic mistake of successful manipulators. She'd gotten overconfident. She thought she was dealing with a simple-minded old man who could be controlled with typed lists and artificial politeness. She was about to learn that Mark Taylor hadn't managed difficult people for 4 decades without learning a few strategies of his own. The question wasn't whether I had enough evidence to expose Jessica's manipulation. The question was how to use that evidence in a way that would protect the grandchildren while opening David's eyes to what his wife was really doing. Jessica wanted to play games with family relationships. Fine. But she was about to discover she'd challenged someone who'd been watching people try to cheat the system since before she was born, and unlike her previous victims, I wasn't going anywhere. What do you think? Have you ever dealt with someone who used kindness as a weapon and rules as a form of control? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. 3 weeks into my investigation, Jessica made her biggest mistake yet. She underestimated Linda. My wife of 40 years had been unusually quiet since the rules list arrived. Linda's not typically the confrontational type. She prefers handling difficult situations with grace and patience. But Jessica misread Linda's diplomatic nature as weakness, which was about as smart as mistaking a sleeping bear for a harmless rug. The breaking point came during Emma's 5th birthday party. Jessica had planned everything with military precision. Organic food, educational activities, a guest list that included exactly 4 children from Emma's preschool and their parents. No extended family beyond David's immediate nuclear unit and us, and we were there on a strict timetable. The party runs from 2 to 4, Jessica had informed us. Emma gets overwhelmed with too much stimulation, so we're keeping everything structured. Jessica's favorite word for controlled. Linda had spent weeks hand-sewing a dress for Emma's favorite doll, intricate detail work that took hours of patient stitching. The kind of gift that showed real love and attention, not something grabbed off a store shelf. When Emma opened Linda's present, Her face lit up like Christmas morning. "Grandma, she's so beautiful. Look, she has tiny buttons and everything." Emma hugged the doll close, then ran to show Jessica. "Mommy, look what Grandma made." Jessica examined the dress with what looked like appreciation. "How lovely. Very rustic. Emma, why don't you put her with your other toys?" Rustic, like Linda's careful craftsmanship was some kind of primitive folk art. But that wasn't the killer blow. That came when one of the other mothers complimented Linda's handiwork. "Did you really make that dress yourself? It's absolutely gorgeous. Emma is so lucky to have such a talented grandmother." Jessica's smile could have frozen fire. "Oh yes, Linda has lots of time for projects like that. It must be nice being retired with no responsibilities." No responsibilities. 40 years of marriage, raising 2 children, managing household finances, caring for her elderly mother until she passed, volunteering at the church food pantry. No responsibilities. Linda's face stayed perfectly composed, but I saw her hands tighten just slightly. Jessica had just declared war on the wrong woman. The party continued with Jessica orchestrating every moment. When Emma wanted to play with Linda's doll instead of participating in the planned activities, Jessica redirected her. "Remember what we talked about, Emma. Birthday parties are for sharing with friends." When Jake tried to climb on my lap during story time, Jessica materialized instantly. "Jake, use your words to ask Grandpa if that's okay first." Every natural moment of family affection got filtered through Jessica's approval system. The other parents started noticing too. I caught them exchanging glances when Jessica interrupted interactions that would have been perfectly normal at any other family gathering. But Jessica's masterstroke came at the end of the party. As Linda and I prepared to leave, right at 4 o'clock as commanded, Emma ran over with her new doll. "Grandma, can she have a sleepover at your house, please?" Before Linda could answer, Jessica intervened. "Oh, sweetheart, remember what we discussed? Special toys stay at home where they're safe. But I want to show her my room at Grandma's house." "Emma," Jessica's voice carried that warning tone kids learn to recognize. "We've talked about this. Some things are just for our house." Emma's face fell. She looked at Linda, then at her beloved doll, then back at Jessica. You could see her little mind working, trying to understand why loving her grandmother and wanting to share something special was somehow wrong. That's when Linda stepped in. "That's perfectly fine, Jessica," Linda said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Emma, when you're ready for a sleepover, just let me know. The invitation is always open." The silence stretched uncomfortably long. "I can't think of a specific example," David admitted. "But that's good communication, right? Partners should consult each other." "Consulting is different from requiring permission. When your mom and I were raising you, we'd discuss big decisions, but we didn't need approval for everyday parenting choices." I could see David processing this, so I pressed gently forward. "Who decided Emma wasn't ready for movie theaters?" "Jessica did the research on age-appropriate entertainment." "Who decided Jake was too young for sleepovers at our house?" Jessica read that separation anxiety peaks at certain developmental stages. "Who decided I was being too physical with the kids?" David paused. "Jessica has training in recognizing inappropriate boundaries." Every parenting decision traced back to Jessica's expertise. David had been systematically trained to defer to her judgment on all matters involving his children. Son, what training does Jessica have in child development? She reads a lot, parenting blogs, research studies. She's very informed. But what's her actual education or professional experience with children? David looked uncomfortable. "She has a degree in communications and works with non-profit organizations. Has she ever worked directly with children, taught preschool, studied child psychology?" "Not specifically, but so Her expertise comes from internet research and personal opinions. David's face flushed. Dad, you're making it sound like Jessica doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm making it sound like Jessica has convinced you she's an expert in areas where she has no more training than you do. Yet somehow, all her expert opinions result in limiting your children's relationships with people who love them. The conversation was getting tense, but David needed to hear this. David, answer me honestly. Before Jessica, did you consider your mother and me to be dangerous or inappropriate around children? Of course not. Have we ever done anything to harm Emma or Jake? No. Have we ever contradicted your parenting decisions in front of the kids? No. Have we ever made you feel like you weren't capable of being a good father? David was quiet. You've always been supportive. Then explain to me why Jessica's rules are necessary to protect your children from people who have never posed any threat to them. David stared at his coffee for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller. Sometimes I feel like I'm walking on eggshells around Jessica when it comes to family stuff. Like any decision that doesn't align with her. Preferences becomes a whole discussion about my loyalty to our marriage. Bingo! There was the manipulation mechanism. Jessica had framed family relationships as a loyalty test. Supporting his parents meant betraying his wife. That must be exhausting. It is. Sometimes I just agree with whatever she wants because it's easier than having the same argument over and over. And now she wants to move 3,000 miles away. David nodded miserably. She says it's about career opportunities. But I think she's tired of managing family dynamics here. She thinks if we move, we can focus on our nuclear family without outside complications. Outside complications. That's what Linda and I had become. David, can I share something I learned in all my years managing people? He nodded. When someone consistently views other people as problems to be managed rather than relationships to be nurtured, the issue usually isn't with the other people. David looked up sharply. Your mother and I aren't trying to undermine Jessica's parenting. We're trying to love our grandchildren. Jessica has turned that love into a threat that requires constant management. Ask yourself why. I left David sitting in that diner with a lot to think about, but I also left with crucial intelligence about Jessica's timeline. If she was planning to move to Portland, this manipulation campaign had an end point. She wasn't just trying to control our access to the kids, she was trying to eliminate it entirely. That night I shared everything with Linda, so we have maybe 3 months before she convinces David to move, Linda said. 3 months to help him see what's really happening. Or 3 months to document everything so thoroughly that when David finally understands what Jessica's been doing, he'll have the evidence he needs to make informed decisions about his family's future. Linda looked at me with that expression she got when she was reading between the lines. Mark Taylor, what are you planning? I smiled. Remember what I used to tell you about shoplifters? The best way to catch them isn't to accuse them of stealing. It's to give them enough opportunity to reveal their true nature. And how exactly do you plan to do that with Jessica? By giving her exactly what she thinks she wants. Complete control over family interactions. She's going to get so comfortable with her power that she'll show David exactly who she really is. If still haven't subscribed to the channel, this is the moment. You won't want to miss what comes next. Jessica thought she was playing chess with people who didn't understand the game. She was about to discover that some of us had been playing chess since before she learned to walk. And her next move was going to be checkmate against herself. The beautiful thing about giving manipulative people exactly what they want is that they inevitably take more than they should. Jessica's confidence in her control over our family was about to become her biggest weakness. I decided to implement what I called strategic compliance. Instead of resisting Jessica's rules or trying to convince David of her manipulation, I would follow her demands so perfectly that she'd be forced to escalate. and every escalation would reveal her true motives more clearly. Phase 1 began the day after my conversation with David. I called Jessica directly, something I'd never done before. "Jessica, I want to apologize for any confusion about family boundaries. David mentioned you're feeling stressed about managing everyone's expectations." She sounded surprised. "Oh, well, thank you for calling, Mark. I appreciate that. I realize I've been making things harder by not fully understanding your parenting philosophy. Would you be willing to help me be a better grandfather?" I could practically hear her chest puffing with pride through the phone. "Of course. I'm so glad you asked. Most grandparents resist learning about modern child development." I don't want to be one of those grandparents. What resources would you recommend? For the next 20 minutes, Jessica lectured me about attachment, theory, developmental psychology, and appropriate boundary setting. I took notes like a dedicated student, asking thoughtful questions and expressing gratitude for her expertise. "This is so helpful, Jessica. I had no idea how much research had been done on these topics. Would it be possible for you to send me some articles? I want to make sure I'm implementing everything correctly." "Absolutely, I'll email you some links." "And Mark, I really appreciate your openness to learning. This is exactly what healthy family relationships look like." After hanging up, I sat back in my office chair. Jessica had just given me something invaluable, her own words describing what healthy family relationships should look like. Those words would become very important later. Over the next week, I became Jessica's model grandfather. I read every article she sent. I implemented every suggestion. I asked permission for interactions that should have been natural instincts. "Jessica, would it be appropriate for me to teach Emma how to play checkers?" "Jessica, is it okay if I bring Jake a small book next time I visit?" "Jessica, what topics should I avoid discussing with the children?" Each question reinforced Jessica's position as the family expert, while documenting the absurd level of control she required over normal grandparent activities. But more importantly, each question was answered via email, creating a written record of Jessica's specific instructions and requirements. Phase 2 involved Linda. My wife, brilliant woman that she is, began implementing her own version of strategic compliance. "Jessica, dear," Linda said during our next supervised visit, "Mark showed me the wonderful articles you shared about developmental boundaries. I'm trying to understand the research better. Could you explain why brief separations from grandparents cause anxiety, but moving 3,000 miles away doesn't?" Jessica's smile faltered slightly. "Well, it's different when the entire family unit moves together. The children maintain their primary attachments." "I see. And the research shows that losing extended family relationships doesn't impact children's emotional development. Children are remarkably adaptable when their core family unit remains strong." Linda nodded thoughtfully. "So the key is maintaining strong primary attachments while limiting secondary relationships?" Exactly. Linda was doing something brilliant. She was asking Jessica to explain her theories in academic terms, forcing Jessica to take increasingly extreme positions that sounded reasonable in isolation, but absurd when viewed as a complete philosophy. "That's fascinating. So in your research, what age do children typically develop the emotional capacity to maintain long-distance relationships with grandparents?" Jessica hadn't expected to be challenged with her own methodology. "Well, it varies by child, but generally not until they're much older, middle school perhaps. So Emma and Jake won't be emotionally ready to have phone calls or video chats with us for another 6 or 7 years? It's better not to confuse them with relationships. They can't fully understand." Linda had just gotten Jessica to argue that 5-year-old Emma was too emotionally immature to talk to her grandmother on the phone. David was sitting right there, listening to his wife explain why his children couldn't handle basic family connections. Phase 3 was the most delicate. I needed Jessica to document her own extremism without realizing she was being led into a trap. I started asking for increasingly specific guidance via email. Jessica, I want to make sure I'm following all safety protocols when interacting with Emma and Jake. Could you provide written guidelines for appropriate conversation topics, physical contact, gift-giving, and activity supervision? I want to make sure Linda and I are consistently following your standards. Jessica, flattered by my apparent submission to her authority, spent hours crafting detailed instructions. The document she sent back was 12 pages long and covered everything from approved vocabulary words to proper hand-washing procedures before contact with the children. Some highlights. Physical contact should be limited to brief hugs initiated by the child, with verbal permission requested each time. Conversation topics must avoid references to old days, family traditions that predate current household rules, or suggestions that children might enjoy activities not pre-approved by parents. Gifts must be educational in nature, non-stimulating, no bright colors or loud noises, and aligned with current developmental goals. Supervision must be maintained at all times. Grandparents should not engage in discipline, instruction, or independent decision-making regarding children's activities. 12. Pages of rules for loving your grandchildren. Jessica had created a manual that treated natural family affection like a dangerous industrial process requiring safety protocols. But the most revealing section came at the end. These guidelines ensure that children develop secure attachments within their nuclear family unit without confusion from conflicting authority figures or outdated parenting approaches. Jessica had put it in writing. She considered Linda and me to be conflicting authority figures with outdated approaches. We weren't grandparents in her worldview. We were competing parents who needed to be managed out of relevance. Phase 4 involved sharing Jessica's manual with David. Son, I want to make sure Mom and I are following Jessica's expectations perfectly. Could you review these guidelines and let me know if we're missing anything? David read the 12-page document in growing disbelief. Dad, this is comprehensive. Jessica put a lot of thought into it. She's really committed to evidence-based parenting. David flipped through pages of instructions for basic grandparent activities. She wrote 12 pages about how you should interact with Emma and Jake. She wanted to make sure we understood her standards. I appreciate the clarity, don't you? David didn't answer immediately. He was reading the section about avoiding references to family traditions that predated current household rules. This says you can't talk to the kids about anything from before Emma was born. That makes sense, right? Jessica doesn't want them confused by different perspectives. Different perspectives on what? Stories about when I was a kid? Jessica's research shows that children bond more securely when they focus on present relationships rather than extended family history. David was starting to look angry. So Emma and Jake aren't supposed to know stories about their father's childhood? According to Jessica's guidelines, those stories could create conflicting loyalties. David set down the manual. Conflicting loyalties between what? Between their current family and their extended family. For the first time since Jessica entered our lives, David was seeing her philosophy spelled out in black and white, not presented as reasonable boundaries or evidence-based parenting, but as a systematic effort to erase his family's history and relationships. Dad, this is insane. Is it? Jessica's been very consistent about her approach. She believes children thrive with clear boundaries and minimal confusion from outside influences. Outside influences? You're talking about their grandparents. I'm talking about what Jessica considers appropriate for her children. David stood up abruptly. Her children? They're my children too. Of course they are. But Jessica's made it clear that she's the expert on child development in your family. David paced around my office, running his hands through his hair. When did I agree to let Jessica decide that my parents were too dangerous to tell my kids stories about my childhood? When did you disagree with it? The question hit home. David had been so trained to defer to Jessica's expertise that he'd never actually examined what he was agreeing to. She says it's based on research. What research, David? Show me one study that recommends isolating children from loving grandparents who have never posed any threat. David couldn't answer because there was no such research. Jessica's evidence-based approach was pure manipulation, dressed up in academic language, but I wasn't done yet. Jessica had given me 12 pages of ammunition, and I was going to use every single bullet. David read section 7 again. The part about gift-giving. David found the section. Gifts must be educational, non-stimulating, and aligned with current developmental goals. What were your favorite gifts as a child? David smiled despite his anger. That remote-controlled car you got me for my 8th birthday. The baseball glove we picked out together. The art supplies you bought when I went through my drawing phase. Were any of those educational, non-stimulating, or aligned with developmental goals? They were fun. They were chosen because you knew what I liked. And according to Jessica's guidelines, that type of gift-giving is inappropriate. David was quiet for a long moment. She's trying to make you into strangers. We already are strangers. Son, when was the last time Emma or Jake ran to us without looking to Jessica for permission first? David's face crumpled. God, what have I let happen? That's when I knew Phase 4 was complete. David was finally seeing Jessica's manipulation for what it was, but I still had one more card to play. David, there's something else you need to see. I pulled out printed copies of Jessica's emails where she'd expressed gratitude for my willingness to learn modern parenting approaches and my openness to healthy family dynamics. Your wife has been very complimentary about my cooperation with her guidelines. David read through the emails. She's praising you for following a 12-page manual on how to hug your grandchildren. She's proud of how well she's trained me. That word to train hit David like a physical blow. Jesus Christ, Dad. She thinks she trained you like a dog. The question is, David, what do you think she's been doing to you? David was finally ready to hear the answer to that question. But Jessica still didn't know her perfect plan was unraveling. Her confidence was about to become her downfall. Jessica's downfall began with her own success. She'd become so confident in her control over family dynamics that she decided to accelerate her timeline. The Portland job offer she announced required an answer within 2 weeks. We need to make a decision quickly, she told David over dinner. One night, I know this because David called me immediately afterward, his voice tight with stress. Dad, Jessica wants to put our house on the market this weekend. She says if we're going to move, we need to act fast to secure the Portland position. 2 weeks. Jessica was forcing a life-changing decision in 2 weeks, leaving no time for David to process what he'd learned about her manipulation tactics. But Jessica had miscalculated. She thought she was dealing with the same compliant husband who'd been deferring to her judgment for 3 years. She didn't realize that David had spent the last week reading through 12 pages of instructions for loving his children and questioning everything he'd accepted about his marriage. What do you want to do, son? I want to slow down. I want to think about what's best for Emma and Jake, not what's most convenient for Jessica's career. What did Jessica say when you suggested waiting? She said the job market is competitive and opportunities like this don't come along often. She said I was being selfish by prioritizing my comfort over our family's future. Selfish. Jessica was using emotional manipulation to force a decision that would permanently separate his children from their grandparents, and she was calling him selfish for wanting time to think. David, In all your years as an accountant, have you ever advised a client to make a major financial decision under artificial time pressure? Never. Pressure tactics are usually red flags for bad deals. What does your gut tell you about this? Portland timeline? David was quiet for a moment. My gut tells me Jessica's afraid I'll change my mind if I have time to think about it. That evening, Linda and I developed our own timeline. If Jessica was forcing a decision in 2 weeks, we had 2 weeks to give David the tools he needed to make an informed choice. Phase 5 began the next morning. Instead of gathering more evidence against Jessica, I decided to gather evidence for David. I wanted him to remember who he was before Jessica convinced him he was incapable of making decisions about his own family. I pulled out photo albums from David's childhood, pictures of him with his grandparents, cousins, extended family, images of birthday parties where kids were actually allowed to be kids, where adults didn't need 12-page manuals to show affection. I called David's college roommate Mike, who'd remained a close friend until Jessica decided their friendship was immature and holding David back from adult responsibilities. Mike, this is Mark Taylor, David's dad. Mr. Taylor, how are you? How's David? I haven't talked to him in months. That's actually why I'm calling. David's been under a lot of stress lately, and I think he could use a friend to remind him who he used to be. Mike was quiet for a moment. Is this about Jessica? Interesting. What makes you ask that? She never liked me. Made it pretty clear that David's friendships from before their marriage were holding him back. Eventually, David stopped returning my calls. What was David like before Jessica? Confident, funny. He made decisions and stuck by them. He had strong opinions about things. Mike paused. Is he okay? He's forgotten who he is. Jessica's convinced him he's incapable of being a good father without her constant guidance. That's bullshit. David was always going to be a great dad. He's thoughtful, patient, responsible. What more could you want? Would you be willing to remind him of that? Mike called David that afternoon. Just a casual friend checking in, wondering how fatherhood was treating him. Their conversation lasted 2 hours, the longest David had talked to anyone outside Jessica's approval circle in months. Afterward, David called me. Dad, I forgot how good it felt to talk to Mike. We used to talk about everything. Books, politics, work challenges, relationship stuff. When was the last time you had that kind of conversation with anyone? I don't know. Jessica says too much outside input complicates decision-making. She prefers that we process things together as a couple. How's that working for you? David laughed, but it sounded bitter. I'm about to move 3,000 miles, away from everyone I love, because my wife got a job offer 2 weeks ago. I'd say it's working great for someone, but not for me. Phase 6 involved Emma herself. During our next supervised visit, I tried something Jessica's rules explicitly prohibited. I asked Emma about her feelings. Emma, sweetie, what's your favorite thing about visiting Grandma and Grandpa? Emma glanced toward Jessica, who was pretending to read a magazine while monitoring our conversation. I like the stories, Emma whispered. What stories? The ones about Daddy when he was little, and about when you and Grandma were young. Those were exactly the stories Jessica's guidelines said would create conflicting loyalties and confusion about family hierarchy. Do those stories make you feel confused, sweetheart? Emma looked genuinely puzzled. Confused about what? About anything. No, they make me feel happy. Like Daddy was a little boy like Jake, and you took care of him like Daddy takes care of me out of the mouths of babes. Emma intuitively understood what Jessica's research had missed. Family stories create connection and security, not confusion. Emma, if you moved far away, what would you miss most? You and Grandma, and my friends, and my room. Emma's voice got smaller. Why do we have to move? What did Mommy tell you about moving? She said Portland has better schools and Daddy can make more money, but I like my school, and I don't want more money if it means I can't see you. Jessica's head snapped up from her magazine. Emma, remember what we talked about? Moving is an adventure, and families stick together. But Grandma and Grandpa are family too. They're extended family, sweetheart. Our nuclear family is what matters most. Emma looked confused again. What's nuclear family? It's you, me, Daddy, and Jake, the people who live in our house. But I love Grandma and Grandpa too. Of course you do. But love means different things for different types of relationships. Emma was 5 years old. She had no idea what Jessica was talking about, but she could sense she was being told her feelings were somehow wrong. That night, David called me again. This time, his voice was different, angry. Dad, Jessica told me you were asking Emma inappropriate questions about the move. What questions were inappropriate? She said you were trying to make Emma feel bad about leaving Portland. I asked Emma what she would miss if we moved. Is that inappropriate? David was quiet. No, that's a normal question. David, Jessica's rule manual says I'm not supposed to discuss topics that might create conflicting loyalties. Apparently, asking your granddaughter about her feelings counts as creating conflict. That's ridiculous. Is it? Because, according to Jessica, any conversation that doesn't support her decisions is undermining parental authority. David was processing this. So, Emma's not allowed to express doubts about moving? Emma's not allowed to express any feelings. That might complicate Jessica's plans. Jesus, when did loving my kids become so complicated? When you married someone who sees love as a competition instead of a resource. That was the moment David finally understood what had happened to his family. Jessica hadn't been protecting his children from confusion or conflicting loyalties. She'd been protecting her position as the sole authority over their emotional lives. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Always. Do you think Jessica loves Emma and Jake, or does she love controlling Emma and Jake? It was the question I'd been waiting 3 years for him to ask. Son, I think Jessica loves the idea of being the perfect mother more than she loves the actual work of raising secure, happy children. What's the difference? Perfect mothers get praise and admiration. Secure, happy children require you to share influence with other people who love them. David was quiet for a long time. She's going to destroy my kids, isn't she? Not if you stop her. How? By remembering that you're their father, not Jessica's assistant. By trusting your own judgment about what's best for your children. By refusing to let anyone, including your wife, convince you that love is dangerous. Phase 6 was complete. David was ready to fight for his family, but Jessica still had one more card to play, and it was going to be her most dangerous move yet. Jessica's final gambit came exactly where I expected it. She tried to force David into an ultimatum, but she made the classic mistake of overconfident manipulators. She revealed her true nature at the worst possible moment. It happened during what was supposed to be a simple family dinner. David had asked for more time to consider the Portland move, suggesting they spend another week evaluating their options. A reasonable request from a husband and father trying to make the best decision for his family. Jessica's reaction was anything but reasonable. More time for what, David? So your parents can fill your head with more guilt about leaving them? David and Jessica were in their kitchen, but the windows were open, and their voices carried to where I was sitting in my car outside their house. I'd stopped by to drop off a book Emma had left at our house, but when I heard the argument starting, I decided to wait. Jessica, this isn't about my parents. This is about making sure we're doing what's best for Emma and Jake. What's best for Emma and Jake is having parents who make decisions together, not a father who runs to his daddy every time he needs to think. The contempt in her voice was stunning. 3 years of marriage, and this was how Jessica really talked about David when she thought no one was listening. I'm not running to my dad. I'm trying to process a major life change that affects our children's entire future. Your children? Last time I checked, I carried them for 9 months and sacrificed my body and career to raise them. They're my children too. Of course they are. That's why we should both be comfortable with decisions about their lives. I am comfortable with this decision, David. You're the one creating problems because you can't cut the cord with your parents. Cut the cord. Jessica was framing David's love for his children's grandparents as a failure to mature as a husband. Jessica wanting my kids to have relationships with their grandparents isn't about cutting cords. It's about giving them the biggest support system possible. Support system. Jessica's voice rose. Your parents undermine every decision I make. Your mother questions my parenting choices. Your father treats me like I'm some kind of outsider who doesn't know what's best for my own children. This was fascinating. Jessica was finally admitting that she saw Linda and me as threats to her authority, not as loving grandparents. When have my parents undermined your decisions? Every time they ask permission for things that should be natural instincts. Every time they follow those ridiculous guidelines I had to create because they couldn't respect simple boundaries. The depth of Jessica's manipulation was breathtaking. She hadn't just been controlling our access to the children. She'd been preparing to eliminate it entirely through legal channels. But here's the thing, Dad. Emma never gave Jessica the answers she wanted. Every recording ends with Emma saying how much she loves you and Mom, how safe she feels at your house, how much she enjoys the stories and games and attention you give her. Smart girl. Even at 5 years old, Emma had been resistant to her mother's attempts to coach negative responses about us. Jessica also has financial records showing every gift you've given the kids, every time you've paid for activities or experiences. She's been framing your generosity as an attempt to buy their affection and undermine her authority. I thought about the dollhouse I'd built for Emma's 3rd birthday, the art supplies I'd bought when Jake showed interest in drawing, the dozens of small gifts and experiences that had made the children smile. Jessica had been cataloging every act of grandparent love as evidence of manipulation. David, this is important. Does Jessica know you found these files? No, I copied everything to a secure drive and covered my tracks. She has no idea I know about her documentation project. Good, because now we have something she doesn't expect. Evidence of her own planning to destroy this family. I sat back, mind racing through possibilities. Jessica had been playing a long game, building a case against David and us for months. But her own documentation revealed something crucial. Her motives weren't about protecting the children, they were about maintaining control. David, I need to ask you something difficult. Are you prepared for Jessica to claim you're an unfit father? Based on what? Based on whatever she thinks will work. Emotional instability, financial irresponsibility, neglect, even abuse allegations. When people like Jessica get cornered, they use every weapon available. David was quiet for a moment. Dad, I've spent 3 years letting Jessica convince me I didn't know how to be a good father. But looking at her research files, reading her strategies for taking my children away from me, I realize something important. What's that? A good father protects his children from people who would use them as weapons. Even if that person is their mother. Linda walked in from the kitchen, where she'd been giving us privacy to talk. David, honey, you look exhausted. When's the last time you ate something? I don't remember. This morning, maybe? Linda disappeared back into the kitchen and returned with a sandwich and coffee. David accepted them gratefully. And I watched my wife mother our adult son the same way she'd been trying to mother our grandchildren. with natural, uncomplicated love that didn't require permission or protocols. "Mom, I owe you an apology," David said after taking a few bites. "I let Jessica convince me that your way of loving was somehow wrong or outdated. I forgot that the way you raised me turned out pretty well." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "You don't owe me an apology, sweetheart. You were trying to be a good husband and support your wife's decisions. That's what we taught you to do. But I was supposed to be a good father first. And good fathers don't let anyone, even their wives, harm their children's relationships with people who love them." I felt a profound sense of relief. David had found his way back to his own moral compass. Jessica's control had been broken not by force or manipulation, but by David's recognition of what kind of father he wanted to be. "So what's the plan?" I asked. David pulled out another folder. "I've already contacted a family lawyer, Margaret Chen. She specializes in custody cases involving parental alienation. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow and requesting primary custody of Emma and Jake." "On what grounds?" "Emotional abuse of the children through systematic isolation from family members, attempted parental alienation, fraudulent relocation plans designed to interfere with the children's relationships with extended family." David's voice was getting stronger with each point, "and evidence that Jessica has been secretly recording and coaching the children to provide negative testimony about their grandparents. Will that be enough?" Margaret thinks so, especially with Jessica's own documentation, showing premeditated planning to destroy family relationships for personal control rather than child welfare. David stood up, looking more like his old self than he had in years. "Dad, I want you to know something. Even if this gets ugly, even if Jessica makes good on her threats, I'm not backing down. Emma and Jake deserve better than a mother who treats love like a limited resource that has to be carefully rationed." I shook hands with my son, feeling like I was meeting the man I'd always known he could become. "We're proud of you, David, and we're here for whatever comes next." "What comes next?" David said with a grim smile. "Is Jessica discovering that she chose the wrong family to manipulate." But even as I felt proud of David's courage, I knew Jessica wouldn't go quietly. She'd spent 3 years building her control system, and she'd fight viciously to maintain it. The real war was just beginning, and Jessica still had no idea that her own weapons were about to be turned against her. The next morning, Jessica received divorce papers along with a temporary restraining order preventing her from interfering with David's parenting decisions or the children's relationships with their grandparents. Her reaction was exactly what we'd expected: pure, uncontrolled rage, but Jessica had made one final fatal error. She'd become so accustomed to controlling family narratives that she'd forgotten other people could tell their own stories, and our story was about to become very public. Jessica's mask didn't just slip when she received those divorce papers. It shattered completely. Within an hour of being served, she was on my doorstep, her carefully maintained composure replaced by raw fury. I opened the door to find her face flushed, hair disheveled, holding the legal documents like weapons. "You did this," she snarled. "You poisoned David against me with your manipulative bullshit." I stepped onto the porch, pulling the door closed. Behind me, Linda was inside with Emma and Jake. David had brought them over for the afternoon while he handled legal meetings. "Jessica, the children are inside. Let's keep our voices down. Don't you dare tell me how to behave around my children. They're David's children too. And right now, he's asked me to watch them while he handles some business." Jessica's eyes blazed. "This isn't over, Mark. You think you've won something, but you have no idea what I'm capable of." "Actually, I do. David showed me your files. The recordings, the documentation, the plans to move across the country. I know exactly what you're capable of." That stopped her cold. The calculation I'd seen in her eyes for 3 years flickered back as she realized her secret planning wasn't secret anymore. Those files are private correspondence. They can't be used against me. Legal discovery is a fascinating process, Jessica. All kinds of private correspondence becomes relevant when child custody is at stake. She started to say something, then stopped. For the first time since I'd known her, Jessica looked genuinely afraid. "What do you want?" "I want what I've always wanted, to love my grandchildren without needing permission, to tell them stories about their father's childhood, to give them hugs without checking a 12-page manual first." "That's not... I want Emma and Jake to grow up knowing they're surrounded by people who love them, not just people you approve of." Jessica's face twisted with contempt. "You pathetic old man. You think this is about love? This is about power. You couldn't stand that I was building something better for those children than your outdated family traditions." "What were you building, Jessica? Children who ask permission before showing affection. Kids who are afraid to express feelings that might contradict your decisions? I was building children with proper boundaries and respect for authority." "Whose authority? Yours exclusively?" Jessica lifted her chin defiantly. "I'm their mother. That comes with certain privileges. Being a mother is a responsibility, not a privilege, and you've abused that responsibility by using it to control everyone around you. I protected my family from toxic influences. You isolated your family from love. There's a difference." For a moment, Jessica looked genuinely confused, as if she couldn't understand the distinction I was making. "Love without boundaries is chaos," she said. "Control without love is abuse." We stood there in my driveway, 3 years of conflict crystallized into those simple statements. Jessica saw family relationships as power structures to be managed. I saw them as connections to be nurtured. "You're going to lose," Jessica said quietly. "I have documentation of every inappropriate behavior, every boundary violation, every instance of you undermining my parental authority." "Jessica, do you want to know what your biggest mistake was?" She waited. "You documented everything, every rule, every restriction, every justification for why loving grandparents were dangerous to their own grandchildren. You created a paper trail of your own extremism." Jessica's face went pale as she realized what I meant. "A judge is going to read your 12-page manual for grandparent interactions and ask one simple question. What kind of mother needs to write instructions for loving children? Those guidelines were necessary because you turned natural family affection into a threat that required management. You made love conditional on compliance with your authority." Jessica was finally understanding that her own documentation would be her downfall. Every email explaining why hugs needed permission, every rule about avoiding family stories, every justification for isolating the children from extended family. It all revealed a pattern of control that no family court would find acceptable. The children need consistency. The children need love, Jessica. Unconditional, uncomplicated, abundant love from everyone who wants to give it to them. Jessica's composure finally cracked completely. "You don't understand what it's like to be responsible for every aspect of their development. Every influence matters. Every relationship shapes them. I can't control outcomes if I can't control inputs." And there it was. Jessica's fundamental truth revealed at last. She saw parenting as an engineering problem where controlling variables would guarantee desired results. She'd never understood that children thrive not through control, but through security, the kind that comes from knowing you're loved by multiple people who want nothing from you except your happiness. "Jessica, do you love Emma and Jake, or do you love the idea of being their perfect mother?" The question hung between us like a challenge. Jessica opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. For the first time in our relationship, she seemed genuinely uncertain. "I love them," she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then let them be loved by other people too." Jessica stared at me for a long moment. I could see her mental calculations working, legal strategies, public relations management, damage control. Everything except the simple recognition that she'd hurt the people she claimed to be protecting. Finally, she turned and walked toward her car. At the driver's door, she paused. This isn't over. Yes, it is. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. David received primary custody, with Jessica granted supervised visitation pending completion of parenting classes and family therapy. The court found her systematic isolation of the children from extended family to be concerning and not in the children's best interests. Jessica moved to Portland anyway, taking the job she'd claimed was the reason for wanting to relocate. She calls the children once a week and visits twice a month, always under supervision. Emma and Jake are polite but distant with her, having learned to be wary of love that comes with conditions and restrictions. But here's what Jessica never expected, and what I never told David I was planning. 3 weeks before the custody hearing, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I called Jessica and asked her to meet me for coffee. She came, probably expecting another confrontation or maybe an offer to negotiate terms. Instead, I offered her something else entirely. Jessica, I want you to know that when this custody battle is over, you'll always be welcome in our family. She stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. What? Emma and Jake are going to need their mother, even if that relationship looks different than what you originally planned. And I want you to know that Linda and I will support whatever relationship you build with them, as long as it's healthy. For the children, Jessica's face cycled through confusion, suspicion, and something that might have been relief. Why would you do that? Because that's what love looks like, Jessica. It doesn't end when people disappoint you. It doesn't require perfect behavior or complete agreement. It just is. Jessica started crying then. Not the manipulative tears I'd seen her use before, but genuine emotion that seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised me. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to love people without controlling them. Then learn. Take the parenting classes, do the therapy, figure out how to be the mother Emma and Jake deserve. What? If I can't? Then you'll miss out on knowing 2 incredible children who could have loved you unconditionally if you'd let them. Jessica looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Why are you being kind to me? After everything I did? I thought about that question. For a moment, remembering my 43 years of dealing with difficult people, my experience with customers who tried to cheat the system, employees who thought they could manipulate their way out of accountability. The truth was, destroying. Jessica wouldn't have given me what I really wanted. What I wanted was simple. A family where love flowed freely, where children felt secure in their relationships, where being a grandparent meant joy instead of walking on eggshells. Because, Jessica, real strength isn't about winning battles. It's about building something better than what came before. I stood up to leave, then paused. Emma and Jake are going to remember how the adults in their lives treated each other during this difficult time. I want them to remember that even when families fall apart, love doesn't have to. Today, Emma is 6 and Jake is 4. They spend every other weekend at our house, where they're allowed to be children without checking a manual for appropriate behavior. Emma still loves the stories about when her daddy was little. Jake climbs on my lap without asking permission. First, and sometimes, on the weekends when Jessica has visitation, she brings them to our house for family dinners. She's learning, slowly, that sharing love doesn't diminish it. David is dating someone new, a kindergarten teacher named Sarah, who thinks it's wonderful that Emma and Jake have grandparents who adore them. She's never once suggested that our relationship with the children needs to be managed or controlled. Last month, Emma made me a card that said, Thank you for fighting for us, Grandpa. She has no idea what that fight really looked like, and she never will. All she knows is that she's surrounded by people who love her without conditions. That's enough for me. And you? What would you have done in my place? Would you have chosen revenge over restoration? Would you have destroyed Jessica completely? Or would you have offered her a chance to become the mother her children deserved? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying our enemies, but from showing them there's a better way to live. Click on the video that appears on your screen to hear another incredible story that will move you, inspire you, and touch your heart. Subscribe. Thanks for listening, and remember, real strength isn't about winning battles. It's about building something better than what came before.